Well, hi there! This is a cassowary. When I tell people that birds are dinosaurs, they often scoff. But when I tell them that cassowaries are dinosaurs, they seem far more okay with it. This is a kiwi, easily on my short list of favorite birds. Basically a shrew that happens to be a bird and lays the largest eggs for its size of any bird. And this is one of its closest relatives, the recently extinct elephant bird. The largest bird known to have ever existed, and one that you may see in your lifetime. And these are just a few members of what has to be one of the coolest clades of living dinosaurs, the Paleognathi. This group includes all of the flightless birds generally known as Ratites, as well as one flighted group that cannot be excluded from any monophyletic group that includes both ostriches and emus. The Paleognathi are one of two major bird lineages. The other, the Neognathi, contains all of the other living avialan dinosaurs. And if you want to know how birds fit in with the other dinosaurs, we have an entire video about that. We also have a whole video about how the birds managed to survive the extinction event that killed off all of the other dinosaurs that we released last Dinosaur December. And I'm happy to announce that Dinosaur December will be returning this December. So it's never too early to subscribe and click the little bell, because we might sneak some other dinosaur content into the other months as well. You can't confine dinosaurs to a single month.
Well, listen, if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is.
Life, finds a way. So subscribe today. Well, today I want to take you through all 5 types of extant ratites, as well as the only flighted group within the Paleognathi, and 2 giant ratite groups that humans drove to extinction in the relatively recent past that might be back during your lifetime, and how they're all related. And if these are not the coolest birds on the planet, what are? Paleognathi means old jaw, and members of the Paleognathi can be identified by their jaw morphologies, as well as their pelvic anatomy and the pattern of grooves in the keratinous sheath on the outer surface of the beak. Eggs are incubated by males in every species of the Paleognathi, with females assisting only in ostriches and great spotted kiwis. The ratites get their name from their flat, raft-like sternums that lack the keel that's present in most other birds. The Latin word ratus means raft, and the flightless members of the Paleognathi have these keelless, raft-like sternums, as there's no need for greater surface area for the attachment of powerful flight muscles. Heck, one group doesn't even have wings. At all. So let's dig into the 8 distinct groups of the Paleognathi that you could reasonably see in your lifetime, and how they're all related. And I really want to know which one you think is the coolest, and which ones you would like to see us review as possible pets in the future. Now, surprisingly, the most distantly related member of the Paleognathi is not the only flighted member, but rather the most famous member of the group, the ostrich. Ostriches are the only extant members of the family Struthionidae, which itself is the only extant family in the order Struthioniformes. Today, there are 2 species of ostriches, the common ostrich from sub-Saharan Africa and the Somali ostrich from West Central Africa. The Arabian ostrich from the Middle East was hunted to extinction in the 1900s. Ostriches, unlike all but one other species in the rest of the Paleognathi, have biparental care, where both the male and the female participate in the incubation of eggs and the raising of offspring. And it's easy to distinguish males from females, as they exhibit considerable sexual dimorphism, with males having dark bodies with white on their wings and tails, and females being a more uniform sandy brown. Males are also considerably larger, reaching heights of well over 2.5 meters, over 9 feet, whereas females max out closer to 2 meters, about 6.5 feet tall. They lay the largest eggs of any currently extant land animal, are the fastest running birds in the world, hitting speeds of 70 kilometers per hour over 43 miles per hour, and are the tallest and heaviest birds alive. For now. weighing up to about 156 kilos, 346 pounds. And one feature that really distinguishes them from any of the other members of the Paleognathy is that they have only 2 toes on each foot. One of my early childhood memories was watching a paleo artist observe ostriches while drawing dromaeosaurs. He pointed out to me that their legs are almost exactly like those of dromaeosaurs, just with the inner toe, with the large hooked claw that Dr. Grant carried around, omitted. I've never looked at ostriches the same way again. The next most distantly related group within the Paleognathy are the 2 or 3, depending on who you talk to, species of rheas, also known as South American ostriches, despite being more closely related to all of the other members of the Paleognathy than they are to the ostriches. And they do look a great deal like small, as in under 1.7 meters tall, about 67 inches, 40 kilogram, 88 pound, 3-toed female ostriches. But with half of them being male, but still looking like female ostriches, and found in South America instead of Africa. And the female has nothing to do with incubating the eggs or raising the chicks. If you haven't taken the time to really pay attention to what these birds look like, you might confuse them with emus. And though they are more closely related to emus and are more similarly sized to emus, they really do look more like small 3-toed ostriches. Some key differences to look for is that they have a much flatter bill than emus. Like ostriches, their head and neck are only covered in short down, almost all the way down, whereas the emu has longer feathers that come most of the way up the neck. And emus have orange eyes. Rheas do not. Emus look more like grassland cassowaries, and they pretty much are, but we'll get to them soon enough. Rheas are the only extant members of the family Rheidae, which is the only extant family in the order Rheaformes. And again, despite all of their similarities in appearance to ostriches, they are actually more closely related to all of the other members of the Paleognathy than they are to ostriches. And if you have any trouble making sense of this phylogeny, or any others, I would highly recommend that you check out our video on how you are the hagfish of reptiles. It should make it all make sense. But the closest relatives of the rheas are all of the remaining members of the Paleognathy. And those are divided into 2 clades. And I don't know which one I'm more excited to talk about, because they're both amazing. But I think I'll start with the larger of the 2 clades, as the smaller contains my very favorite Ratites, and I should save them for last. But also because the larger clade contains some of the strangest members of the Paleognathy, and some of the biggest moral questions of our day. Now this clade contains 2 clades of its own. One that contains the emus and cassowaries, and the other contains the moas and the tinamous. And as excited as I am to talk about emus, and especially cassowaries, I am more excited still to talk to you about moas and tinamous, because they're both so weird. One of them being weird because its wings work for flight, and the other being weird because they have no wings at all. And I'll talk first about the winged one because it is going to make a lot of the rest of the Paleognathy make more sense. I'm talking about the tinamous. These are the only flighted members of the Paleognathy. And for a long time, they were thought to be sister to the Ratites, their closest relatives. But not Ratites. Like you aren't a reptile. But as we started to be able to analyze relatedness using DNA, we started to discover many unexpected relationships among the Ratites, including that the tinamous are not on the outside looking in, but rather right in the middle. Sister, not to the Ratites, but to the moas. More closely related to all of the Paleognathy, other than the ostriches and rheas, than ostriches and rheas are to any of the other members of the Paleognathy, including one another. But they fly. And that gets to one of the biggest advantages of using DNA to determine relatedness over morphological characters. Phylogenies based off of morphology suffer from 2 major biases. One being that they're biased by features that stand out to the people performing the analysis. Conspicuous things like, for example, flightlessness. Whereas phylogenies using DNA can use randomly selected DNA sequences from coding and non-coding regions of the genome as well as mitochondrial sequences, which just means that this bias can be eliminated. The second bias or issue is that morphologically based phylogenies are likely to struggle to differentiate between homology and analogy. Homology being similarities due to shared ancestry. For example, the similarity between the skeletal structures of a human hand, a bat wing, and a dolphin flipper. They are similar, not necessarily due to similar function, but due to similar ancestry. And this isn't to say that they can't have similar functions, like the hand of a human, a gorilla, and a lemur, but the similarity is due principally to shared ancestry. Thus, homologous structures like these are very useful in determining relatedness. For example, the wings of bats, pterosaurs, birds, insects, and airplanes all have some similarities, but those similarities are likely not due to being inherited from the same winged ancestor. But rather, the similarities are more likely due to the fact that a wing needs to have certain attributes to function as a wing, and thus similar features were similarly beneficial in multiple different lineages. Convergent evolution, or analogy. Similar features that are due to similar selective pressures and not due to shared ancestry. And analogy, unlike homology, is not useful for creating an accurate phylogeny. If anything, they serve to lead us to draw inaccurate relationships based on morphology, especially if analogous traits are highly conspicuous, like, say, flightlessness. It isn't that difficult to lose the ability to fly. And you see, flightlessness has evolved in numerous bird lineages outside of the Ratites, particularly on islands with few predators. And yet colonization of islands is much more likely for flighted birds for obvious reasons. They can fly to the islands. And the thing about islands is that it is often the case that lots of resources, and thus niches, are open and available for colonizers. Flight can assist greatly in colonization, but there are many constraints associated with flight. And losing the ability to fly can remove those constraints. In fact, loss of flight likely happens simply because removing one or more of those constraints is more valuable than being able to fly. So it happens fairly often with birds on islands that lack large predators. And as it turns out, this likely explains how Ratites ended up distributed to islands all over the world, despite being flightless. Now, flightlessness is not a homology in the Ratites, but rather an analogy, a convergence. And the 46 species of flighted tinamous from Mexico, Central, and South America are right in the middle of this group. Which is why I generally favor the monophyletic group Paleognathae, which includes the tinamous, over the paraphyletic Ratites, which arbitrarily exclude them. They can't be removed from the Paleognathae any more than the bird can be removed from the dinosaurs or the reptilia. And just so you know, we now have a shirt in our Teespring store so that you can have this conversation with all of your friends, because birds are reptiles. But let's talk about these oddballs that are only oddballs because they can do the thing that we usually associate with birds: fly. Though they generally prefer to hang out on the ground, preferring to hide or run away from predators, only flying when absolutely necessary. Which likely explains their generally cryptic colorations. They prefer not to draw attention to their oddball ability. Their closest relatives would likely point and laugh at them if they had wings with which to point and weren't currently extinct, but we'll get to them soon enough. And it might also be because they have the smallest heart and lungs for their size of any bird, that they can only fly under extreme circumstances. Like all of the other groups that we've discussed so far, tinamous are alone, the only extant members of the family Tinamidae, which itself is the only extant family in the order Tinamiformes. But, especially compared to the Ratites we've discussed so far, not only can they fly, but they're considerably smaller. And this makes sense because, as we've discussed in our video about why the birds survived the extinction of the other dinosaurs, flight limits body size greatly. And they do possess a keel and large associated flight muscles, unlike the rest of the extant members of the Paleognathae. Because, once again, they are the only ones that fly. But that's enough about them, because I am really excited to talk to you about their cousins, who can't point and laugh because they don't have any wings and are currently, and I stress the word currently, extinct. The moas. The moas of New Zealand were long thought to be the closest relatives to the other ratite of New Zealand, the kiwi, but that doesn't appear to be the case. And this makes more sense when you realize that the ancestors of both kiwis and moas likely flew to New Zealand, which is much easier to do than to swim over, and more likely to happen more than once. We currently know of 9 species of moas in 3 families within the order Dinornithiformes, and the largest were much larger than ostriches, perhaps as much as 3.6 meters, 12 feet tall, and weighing upwards of 230 kilos, 510 pounds, though some species were much smaller. And I only place any doubt about their overall height because their spine attaches at the rear of the skull and not the base, so they probably did not stand upright very often. Though Maori art, made by people that coexisted with the moas, does indicate that they certainly could. And this would make them the tallest, though not the heaviest, of all known birds. That one's coming up. Moas, like most tinamous, but unlike the other ratites, had 4 toes. 3 forward-facing walking toes, and 1 higher toe that did not touch the ground. And this foot morphology is known not only from skeletons, but from an extremely well-preserved foot of a male moa that is as amazing as it is terrifying. Imagine having that reach out to get you while you're trying to go to bed at night. Now, the reason that we have such amazing specimens of this currently extinct bird is because it has only been extinct for, at most, a few hundred years. Polynesians didn't arrive in New Zealand until about 700 years ago. And it looks like all of the moas were gone around 100 years after that. Humans can be rough on a species that faced no real predators, well, except for the Hassett's eagle, the largest eagle ever known to have existed, which became extinct around the same time as the moas. Though there are many reports of people having seen moas more recently, all physical evidence of their existence dates back to 600 or more years ago. And that's sort of a long time, but it's also not a long time. And what this means is that we have a lot of moa specimens and DNA. We're really at that moment where our scientists are not so much preoccupied with whether or not they could, but whether or not they should. Should they resurrect the moa? Because the answer to whether we could is almost certainly yes. Yes, we could. So, should we? Should we resurrect a species that is extinct, but that was driven to extinction by humans in the relatively recent past? And if so, why? For reintroduction into the environment that has changed in their absence? For zoos and other human learning and entertainment? Is it okay to bring species back that went extinct? What if it wasn't due to humans that they went extinct? How far back are we taking this? Should we resurrect mammoths? Should we release mammoths into the wild? What about T-Rex? I'd love your thoughts about all of this, because I think there's a very good chance that you will see a moa in your lifetime, if we decide that we should. Heck, you might be able to have a pet dodo bird, which isn't a ratite, but it is another great example of a flightless island bird. And not a dumb bird, just a bird that has no concept of a predator. It would probably make an amazing pet. But is it okay to bring them back? While you wrestle with these difficult questions, I'll give you a question that isn't so difficult. Are cassowaries awesome? Yes they are. And their closest relative, the emu, they're not so bad either. They're all members of the family Cassowariidae, within the order Cassowariiformes. I told you that emus were basically just grassland cassowaries. Well, let's talk about these amazing birds and how many people they've killed, especially considering that humans fought an actual war against them and lost. That's right, a war with soldiers and machine guns. The birds won. So let's talk about them. The family Cassowariidae. The family Cassowariidae contains 3 species of cassowaries and 1 species of emu. The emu is currently the second tallest extant bird behind the ostrich at 1.9 meters, just over 6 feet tall, and weighing as much as 60 kilos, 132 pounds. They're also fast. So fast that they're difficult to shoot with a machine gun, even if it's mounted on a vehicle. Not like that would ever come up, but turns out that it did, so now we know. These Australian ratites are easy to distinguish from African ostriches and American rheas, not only by their size, but also by their previously mentioned orange eyes, bill shape, and fluffy necks. Like most ratites, they have 3 toes, which also distinguishes them from the ostriches, as well as the moas, and many of the tinamous that you were never going to confuse with an emu anyway. If you want to know more about emus, or whether they would make a good pet, I'll go ahead and make a whole emu video to release later this year. So there's another reason to subscribe and click the little bell, if you don't have one already. Their closest relatives are the 3 species of cassowaries. You're probably most familiar with the southern cassowary, also known as the double-wattled cassowary of Australia, New Guinea, and other nearby islands. But you may be less familiar with the smaller northern cassowary, or the dwarf cassowary, found in and around New Guinea. Cassowaries are the 3rd tallest and 2nd heaviest of all currently extant birds, coming in at around 1.5 to 1.8 meters, 5 to 6 feet tall, and weighing as much as 58.5 kilos, about 130 pounds. In most ways, they look like emus, but you're unlikely to confuse the two. Unlike their brown grassland counterparts, cassowaries are jungle dwellers. They have black body feathers, naked, often blue upper necks and heads, and a distinctive skin-covered casque on top of the head. Some, as you may have guessed, have wattles on their necks. And the inner toe on both feet has a particularly nasty claw that is sharp and used as a weapon. So let's talk body count. The combined body count for cassowaries is 2. 2 confirmed kills, more than 70 years apart. One in 1926 that taught us that if you're going to attempt to beat a cassowary to death with your brother, don't fall down. And the other in Florida in 1999 that taught us that if you're going to keep a cassowary as a pet, don't fall down. Should we make a video about keeping cassowaries as pets? Anyway, spoiler alert, don't fall down with one. There have been over 150 confirmed attacks, and almost all of them involved birds that were being fed by humans, about 75%. The remaining attacks were almost all in defense of themselves or their offspring. So the moral of the story is, don't feed cassowaries, don't attack them, and if you do, for the love of all that is good, don't fall down. More people have actually been killed by emus, which is likely because there are more of them, and you're more likely to encounter one, feed it, and or try to club it to death. Listen, machine guns didn't do the job, and they're protected. Don't fight emus. How many times do I need to say this? Well, that gets us to the final clade, and my favorite clade of ratites. Obviously, I love pretty much all of the animals, but there is a short list of, I really don't know exactly how many animals, but probably between 10 and 20, that fill my soul with absolute joy. Whale sharks, belugas, and this animal, the kiwi, are definitely on that list. I was finally able to see one in person in 2019 when I was in New Zealand, and it was unforgettable. And I talked about them quite extensively in this video that we made on that trip. A video that was made possible in no small part thanks to our rad fans and stinkin' rad fans at Patreon. And I should mention that we are considering a new Patreon level. And one of the perks that we're thinking about adding to that level would be the option to accompany me on some of our future trips. Should we do this? We'll put up a poll soon on Patreon to see if that is something that you would be interested in seeing. So if you would like to participate in that poll or just see the awesome features we have for our patrons currently, please check it out. But right now, let's talk about kiwis. I love them. They might be the weirdest birds in the world. All 5 extant species are found in New Zealand and fall into the family Apterigidae, the only extant family within the order Apterigiformes. Like all ratites, it is flightless. Though it does have wings, unlike its New Zealand cousin the moa, they are almost impossible to see through the feathers. The feathers are brownish in color and very hair-like in appearance. In some ways, it looks like a mammal. It also acts more like a mammal than a bird, so seems fitting. Now, ratites are the kings of big eggs. The ostrich lays the largest eggs of any currently extant bird. And I say currently because the closest relative to the kiwi that you may actually see in your lifetime laid the biggest eggs of any bird ever known to have existed. Ever. Bigger than those of most other known dinosaurs. Bigger than Argentinosaurus, the largest dinosaur we have ever discovered. bigger. But we'll get to them in a moment, because even though the kiwi egg isn't the biggest egg ever, for their size, they lay by far the largest egg of any bird. It can be 20% of the size of the mother. That's like a 120-pound woman having a 25-pound baby. That's all head, with a hard skull. It's insane, and massively representative of the historical environment where kiwis came to be. As we've discussed, flightlessness evolves fairly often on islands without many predators. Kiwis and moas aren't even the only examples from New Zealand alone. Other examples from just New Zealand include a flightless parrot, the kakapo, 2 flightless rails, the takahi and the weka, 3 flightless wrens, and 2 moa-sized birds called adzabils. Flightlessness in birds isn't restricted to the Paleognathi, and New Zealand was a prime location for the evolution of flightless birds, which probably explains why it happened at least 2 separate times in the Paleognathi alone. Well, lack of predators doesn't necessarily mean that life is easy for island birds. Because while predators are unlikely to eat you, it also means that they're unlikely to eat everybody else. So virtually nobody is getting eaten.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
When predation isn't the threat, that doesn't mean that everybody gets to survive. It just means that competition becomes the biggest danger. And in a competitive environment, small, poorly developed babies tend to be the first to go. So what does that mean? It means that individuals that produce fewer but larger babies are more likely to have some survive to maturity than those that produce more but smaller babies.
Begin!
Hence the ginormous eggs of the kiwi. Few large outcompete many small. And, as is the case with almost all of the paleognaths, it is the male that incubates the egg and raises the giant chick, at least in most species. Because one species, the great spotted kiwi, joins the ostrich as the only other member of the group where the female assists in incubation and care of the chick. Though nobody would really say that female kiwis haven't done their part. That egg. There's so much to say about kiwis that I'll have to recommend our video from New Zealand. But I just want to throw in a couple of more things before I move on to history's giant egg champion. I mentioned how much they are like mammals. It isn't just the hair-like feathers and the flightless lifestyle. Kiwis are smart. At least they have big brains. Paleognaths generally have smaller brains for their size than do other birds. Not kiwis. They have big brains for their size, though they are some of the smallest members of the group, with the largest kiwis standing about 45 centimeters, 18 inches tall, and weighing about 3.3 kilos, 7.3 pounds. Most are even smaller than that. Birds also generally have great vision and a poor sense of smell. Not kiwis. Kiwis have very poor vision. In fact, blind kiwis seem to do just as well as sighted kiwis, but they live in a world of smell, like they were shrews. They even have their nostrils at the end of their long, pliable, touch-sensitive beaks. Beaks that are unlike any other bird, but not unlike the nose of a shrew. Because New Zealand historically lacked not only most predators, it also lacked mammals, except for bats and marine mammals. Which means that the niche space for shrew was wide open, and the ancestors of kiwis took it. Anyway, I never tire of discussing kiwis, but I need to get on to the last member of the Paleognathi. You know, the one that laid bigger eggs than Argentinosaurus. That bird. The closest relative of the kiwi that you might get to see in your lifetime. The most massive bird we know to have ever lived on this planet. The elephant bird of Madagascar. Now, we already discussed the fact that moas were taller. They were. The tallest elephant bird stood less than 10 feet, 3 meters tall. But it weighed 730 kilos, about 1,600 pounds. Even more massive than the giant Australian demon ducks of the family Dromornithidae. I swear, every time I do one of these videos, I discover 5 other videos I want to make in the future. Now, Madagascar is an island off the coast of Africa. It would make sense that the elephant birds, the largest birds ever, would be closely related to the African ratite, the largest bird alive today, the ostrich. At least this would make sense if the shared ancestors of elephant birds and ostriches were large flightless birds, but again, they likely were not. And it now appears that the ostrich is the most distant relative to the elephant bird among all of the Paleognathi, because the closest relatives to the elephant birds actually appear to be my beloved kiwis, which only makes me love elephant birds even more. It is possible that there were up to about 11 distinct species of elephant birds, though that is unclear. Some researchers think there was only 1 species. However many there were, they were all members of the family Apiornithidae, of the order Apiornithiformes. And I say were because the elephant birds went extinct somewhere around 1,000 years ago, though they may have still been around in the 1600s. It is almost certain that these birds went extinct due to human interaction. The bird itself would be an amazing source of food, but that might not have been their downfall. It might have been their colossal eggs. Their eggs were upwards of 34 centimeters, 13 inches long, and weighed around 10 kilos, 22 pounds. It had the volume of over 150 chicken eggs. You could make omelets for the whole neighborhood. And that actually gets to the downside of producing few large eggs. That strategy tends to work best where predation is low and competition is high. But when predators are introduced, including human predators, it can be devastating, as it has been for their cousins the kiwis and sharks among other species. If predation occurs, they can't replenish quickly. But while these giant eggs may have been their downfall, they also may be their saving grace, because many of these eggs have been found and DNA has been recovered. This DNA is what revealed their relationship to the wonderful little kiwi. And given that we have assembled a nearly complete elephant bird genome, we are, as with the moa, at the point of whether we should, not whether we could. So, should we? While you think about that, let's take a moment just to discuss these Malagasy mega kiwis. Though, to be honest, they weren't super related to kiwis either, just more closely than they are to anything else you might ever see in your lifetime. As you know, they could stand almost 10 feet tall and weigh the better part of a ton. Like kiwis, it appears that they had poor eyesight and a good sense of smell. Like most ratites, but unlike ostriches and moas, that are closest size rivals, elephant birds had 3 toes on each foot. Another feature differentiating them from the moas was that they had wings. But they were, and this is probably obvious from their size alone, flightless. They had a very cone-shaped beak, unlike the flat beak of the ostrich, that it used to eat fruits. Some coconut species on Madagascar seem to be adapted to being dispersed by ratites, even though there aren't any. At least one of these is now critically endangered as it struggles to disperse its seeds. If only there was some way to save them. And that brings us to the end of our tour of the Paleognathi. It certainly has given us a great deal to consider. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. Am I still saying that right? I worry that I'm...
Say it again.
Paleognathi.
I think so.
I worry that I'm going down the penwing path, or it just morphs little by little.